Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Staunton campus and Head at campus and those watching on iCampus today. We're grateful you're here. Today is another one of our Faith and Science Sundays. Today, Jimbo's going to, well, we don't technically know what he's going to do. Once a guy gets a microphone, you don't know, right? So we think he's going to answer some of those questions, of kind of the top questions you may be asking. So be prepared to take some notes about that. For those who don't know who he is, his name is Dr. James Bray. We call him Jimbo around here, and if you call him James, he'll correct you. But he is a professor of biology at Blackburn College. When you hear him talk, he will sound like he's from Arkansas. That's because he is. So just for those who don't know him, for the rest of us, that's pretty normal. Anyway, before he comes, we'll continue to do these. Not so much like we did one a couple weeks ago, we'll do one today. We don't have any more scheduled. We will schedule some more in the future after we kind of evaluate this one as well. If you have questions, so I'll send an email again tomorrow. We'll send another one next week. But as you have questions about science questions, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Let us know the questions, and we'll give those questions to Jimbo, and Jimbo in some form, whether it be on the stage, whether it be in a video forum, whether it be in a Q&A question, as a part of a service, Jimbo will answer those questions for us, all right? So don't be afraid to ask questions. If you have questions, let's get the questions answered. Sometimes we have questions like, well, I don't want to ask the questions, I'll feel stupid. Can we be honest for a second? How many of you have just said to yourself, I'm an idiot? How many of you have ever done that? Okay, so we're all stupid one day or the other, right? Okay, so you're not going to feel stupid around here because we've all been stupid one time or the other. So ask your questions. We'll get the questions answered, and that helps all of us. So if you ask the question, I had the same question maybe, or I didn't even know I had the question, but I'm glad you asked it because I wanted to hear it too. So ask your questions, and we'll get those questions answered in time as we move forward. So we'll do that. Also, just for those who may not have been aware of it yet, today, right after the second service, basically at 1 o'clock, so we will have another one of our Old Testament live events, which is from 1 to 4. It's be an event where if you come for that period of time, you'll walk away, and in 2 minutes, you'll be able to repeat the 4 basic main characters and events of the Old Testament, and you'll understand those. And so if you give some time to that, it'd be a great event for you. So with that, Jim, where's Jimbo at? I've lost him. Oh, there he is, hiding with his pretty wife. Jimbo, come on up.
All right, well, thank you. And boy, wonderful introduction. Now I have to do something, right? So this idea of answering questions, and so I'll get around to some of that later today, but before then, thought I might give you a little bit about kind of what inspires me or how I'm inspired sometimes, and then how that leads to certain inquiries and maybe attempts to answer certain questions. So I had a lot of time to kill, and people with a lot of time to kill sitting outside of a bookstore. I decided to go in the bookstore because, well, they had a really good coffee shop in the back. And so I bought my coffee, and I decided on the way out, there's this big, huge bookstore in this one little spot where they had science and technology. So I thought, I'll spend a little time there because, I like science and technology. So I'm looking through, and of course, there's all the wonderful things about flowers and beekeeping, and then we get into, here's a new book about Tesla. He died a few years ago. But all these other things, and then I come across a title, and that really gave me a point where I want to start today. And this was the title of the book. And I read it, and I purposely left the author off because I'm not going to promote books as part of this, but this was the title of it. And as I read it, I thought, oh man, I got this all wrong. This guy says this stuff is incompatible. Well, we'll get to a number of problems that I have with this, but then it began to inspire me and think a little bit about science and scientists, if you will. And so this idea of fake versus fact Science and religion are incompatible, and yet I've spent my entire life as a scientist seeing things in a very different light than this. So I really started to question why. This fellow is a pretty well-known scientist. He's a geneticist and has a pretty good understanding and grasp on scientific principles within the confines of what we can understand. So why would he come to this conclusion when I come to something very different? And then I started thinking about this. Well, here's the simplest answer for it. It kind of looks like this. Science is still growing up. So let's think about this a little bit. Where did science really start? This idea of inquiring, asking questions, hypotheses, theories, these things we talked about last time. And it kind of dawned on me. Well, it all started in Genesis from our book, right? Because, Adam kind of had a job. He had to name all the animals and all the other plants and things of that nature. Well, that's called taxonomy and nomenclature. So science has been around since we've been around. But when we think about Western science, so science in America, westernized countries, anybody have any idea where science started in the Western world, so to speak? It started in one place, and you're sitting in it. It started in the church. Science started in Western culture as kind of a way to understand the world that God has given us. And so here's kind of a way to think about it. Science was birthed in the church. Well, as most things happen, we're birthed and then we start to grow up and we go through growing pains of various things in life. And then it kind of dawned on me. Science is still growing up, and science has hit that wonderful point in its existence that we, for people, like to call, and I put this in quotes, teenagers. Now, I want to be very clear about what that teenager means. That doesn't mean you're of a certain age. It has more to do with an attitude. There's a lot of people that are teenage years that actually are a lot smarter and have it together a lot better than I probably ever will. And then there's a lot of so-called adults that are perfectly good teenagers. So it's more about kind of how you act. And in science, I was like, well, this kind of makes sense. And then I saw this, and I wanted this thing to say, here we go. So this teenager thing, everybody's seen this, right? It should be in quotes. Teenagers, you're tired of being harassed by your parents. And I started thinking, how does that fit science? And, you can find memes for teenagers all day long, but finding those same memes for science doesn't really exist. So if you can't find a meme that you want, you just make it up yourself. Because that's what a meme is, right? And so this was kind of what I came up with. Scientists, if you're tired of being harassed by God, hey, act now. Pretend you know it all. And that's what tends to happen a lot of times. Put God in a box. Put God in a box of your understanding. And then boast about how smart you are because God's in the box that you understand. And you better do this while you know everything, because we all know this teenage attitude like this, sooner or later, what's going to happen? Hopefully. You're going to outgrow it, right? And so it's kind of my hope that science in general starts to outgrow those things. And I think some people it is, some people it's not. So we still have these things going on. So that really started to kind of inspire me to think about how do we answer these questions as scientists? And so kind of leading out of this, kind of the first question, the overarching one we covered kind of last time, I wanted to just kind of reiterate this, is can science and faith coexist? Well, according to that book title, the answer is no. Well, I give you a little idea about that in science and books. So I just want to put that in perspective. A number of years ago, there were some prominent researchers. So they were looking at all the things we know about a cell, kind of the basic unit of life, which y'all heard of that before, which is probably one of the most ironically named things in existence. The cell, the basic unit of life, was named by a guy looking at dead tissue, so it wasn't alive. And also, to take it a step further, he named it after a prison cell because it looked like prison cells. So the basic unit of life is a prison cell that was dead. So that's a little bit about kind of how we work sometimes in science. But anyway, these prominent researchers, they were working with this idea of knowing what we know about a cell, like all the components in a cell, the cytoplasm, the DNA that has to be in there, the membranes and the structure of the membranes, and on it goes. That with what we know in science, we can figure out the smallest size that a cell can be. And so they came up with this wonderful mathematical equation based on all this information. It was peer-reviewed by other scientists, made it into major publication that now we know, based on everything we know about a cell cannot be any smaller than this given size and still function. And then there was somebody that was an ecologist working in the field in a hot sulfur spring, dug up some things and was looking at these slides later, and you can probably guess what he found. He found cells that were smaller than what we thought could exist. And my answer to that's kind of twofold. One is we're always learning things. Remember, science is tentative. As I talked about that last time, it's always open to change, or it should be if it's science. And then the other thing we should gather out of this is other critters don't read our books. So kind of giving that. Can science and faith coexist? Absolutely they can. Because one of the things we have to realize in science, you have to ask the right questions. You have to ask questions that our ability to understand, comprehend, and carry out experiments can actually attempt to answer. And so what I kind of plan to do with the rest of the time is actually kind of hit a few of those questions, some that have been sent in, some that we had prior, and just kind of look at that from the standpoint of science and kind of my interpretation of what that means. So can science and faith coexist? Once again, I'm standing here, so absolutely, if you frame the questions correctly and understand the limits of what science can do. So kind of the first question I want to talk a little bit about is this one. This idea of can science prove or disprove the existence of God? This is a big one we get a lot of times as scientists, where we just really want to know, okay, all this stuff you know in science, can you prove this? All right, just as a reminder, from a couple of weeks ago, this is kind of my tenets of how I build my understanding of science. Is there three things that you cannot do not exist in science. You don't prove anything. There's no truth in science. I have to watch how I do my fingers. And there's no fact in science. So back to the name of that title, that a prominent science, faith versus fact. He wasn't even asking the right question. We don't have facts in science. As I've said, all science is tentative. If we still had facts in science, we probably wouldn't be in this room today with the technology surrounding us, right? We would be sitting out around a fire somewhere with a minimal spoken language at best, throwing rocks at each other. Some days we still do that. That's another story, right? So this idea of facts, tentative, things change. Do we prove anything in science? You know, the example I gave you was the fairies painting the sky blue. You know, a perfectly good, testable hypothesis, so to speak. It's a testable statement. Well, we know better than that. At least we think we do, right? As somebody pointed out, maybe they're dressed in black like ninjas, so you don't see them. Or it could be all those little stars we're seeing up there. Actually, they're flashlights while they're working to paint the sky. I don't know, maybe. We didn't prove anything. Now we have evidence to support or refute a statement that we make, but we don't prove anything. And I'll still contend with this question, back to putting God in a box. You know, it was the comedian Brad Stein was the one that made the statement, you know, when I talk about somebody wanting a God that they can understand, how stupid is that? As we just said earlier, how many of y'all have done stupid things? I raise both hands because I do it on a regular basis, right? But a God that we can understand, the thing that created this universe and everything around us, the song we sang was a perfect opener to that. God wonders beyond our galaxy There's a lot of wonders in the galaxy. You know, I've wondered when I look at an oak tree how all of that actually works. All of that around us. And we can understand a very small part of it. So proving, disproving the existence of God is not a question to even ask of science. Science is not capable of doing that. So we can kind of move that aside. Prove, disprove the existence of God. No, science isn't capable of doing those kinds of things. That's not the question to ask. So hopefully that helps a little bit with that question of proving and disproving. We don't prove anything in science. Science is tentative. And always keep that in mind. When people talk about proving things in science, they're kind of walking away from what science can actually do. So another question that often comes up. So can we prove, disprove things? Nope. We can support it or not. But this is a great one. How does evolution fit within religion? Well, let that one soak in for a second. Evolution and fit. And when I hear evolution, I oftentimes think of Dana Carvey, the character on Saturday Night Live. He used to do these skits called The Church Lady. And I know some of y'all remember that. If you don't, well, we have ways to look that up now. So look it up. Look up The Church Lady. And look up The Church Lady, in particular the one where the church lady's talking about Santa Claus. Because that kind of fits with evolution for me. Because the church lady was talking about Santa. And y'all know this. If you take the letters in the word Santa and you move them around and jumble them, what do you get? It's a bit Satan, right? So when we hear this word evolution, oftentimes we get the same kind of vibe from that. That we don't hear evolution, we hear evil. And that's a mistake. Because here's what evolution means. You look evolution up, there's multiple definitions, but literally it just means to change. Something is changing. That's all it really means. And oftentimes when we talk about evolution, it'll go back to a fellow by the name of Charles Darwin. I figure most of y'all have heard the guy before, heard that name, Charles Darwin, the voyage of the Beagle, the finches on Galapagos Islands, and things of that nature. One of the first things to know is that Darwin didn't coin the term evolution. That came afterwards. That was not his words. That was not his work. Darwin's work was an idea that he came up with that he called descent with modification. Literally, things change. That's all he was saying. Because what he was seeing was apparent changes in organisms based on the environment. So let's think about that in context a little bit. Changes due to the environment, influences like that. How many of y'all have heard of this thing called the gene pool? You know, kind of make this say the gene pool, all the genetics of an organism within a population or within a species or throughout the world, or, you know, as you said from the South, you know, make that joke about something that somebody peed in your gene pool type thing, you know, stuff like that. And I was going to say let that one soak in, but no, don't let that one soak in. That'd be the wrong thing to say. But this gene pool is the idea of the genetic variability within a population. And we know something is always going on in the environment. So you have a population and you have all these different things, these different characteristics or versions, different versions of characteristics. And we know when the environment's a certain way, certain characteristics work, others don't. Environment changes, same thing. Maybe other characteristics work better than some that don't. And so it's this change that's happening. And that's really what Darwin saw. And he had this idea. When you look at a population, populations are always going to reproduce well beyond what their environment can hold. It's called carrying capacity. And so if carrying capacity is here because of something that's going to limit that population, a population doesn't reproduce looking at that going, oh, that looks like the ceiling. We better stop growing. Nope, blows right on through it. And then at some point in time, something brings that population back down. It's a crash because it goes so far beyond what's in a given area, what it can sustain, that some people are going to win, some are going to lose. And that's really where it gets into the meat of what Darwin saw. was that when that happens, when a population over-reproduces, so to speak, produces more individuals than an area can sustain, some are going to make it, some aren't. So then the question becomes, well, which ones make it, which ones don't? And that's where the change can come in. Based on that variability within a population, some organisms are a little better adapted. They have a little better characteristics that help them succeed in an area where others don't. It's what they refer to as unequal reproductive success, was the wonderful term for it. And so the ones that are better suited and can reproduce, it takes two parts. You've heard this idea of survival of the fittest was part of what came out of his work. Survival of the fittest has two parts to it. You could be the biggest, the baddest, the best adapted to whatever the environment is, but if you're sterile, the population doesn't care, right? So you have to have that adaptive advantage, and you have to be able to pass that adaptive advantage on to successive generations. That's what Darwin talked about. That is the seed that became the idea of evolution, that things change over time. Now, in that, when we talk about how that fits the Bible, evolution talks about working on variability within populations, within species, and things of that nature. Nowhere does evolution say something, or no, excuse me, nowhere, well, for that matter, yeah, nowhere does evolution say if you breed two dogs together, you get cats. That's not what evolution is. Now, I can breed two dogs together and I can get variability within dogs. Just look at the variability of dog populations in this world, and most of those we've artificially selected for. But you also know that if you take a Great Dane and a Chihuahua and a ladder, you can produce puppies, right? That was just bad. But anyway, they need a little help, I guess. But the genetics are still compatible. They're still the same species. So we've produced a lot of variability within those populations, but we're not breeding them together and we're getting cats out of the deal. So evolution fits perfectly well within the Bible, the context of the Bible. Like begets like, but there's nothing in the Bible that says it can't change over time. We know that happens. We know from the very beginning of the fall things changed. Everybody's getting ready to start working on their garden now. Things changed from the beginning, right? So the idea of evolution as an agent of change fits perfectly well. Now, there is one problem, though. Sometimes folks will take this idea of evolution and try to extrapolate back, to go back to, well, this is how it all started. It all started with evolution. Well, a colleague of mine had a great way to put that. And he was talking about it one day, and he was going to use this analogy in his classes where he's talking about evolution. And he said, you know, evolution is like that show, This Old House, right? How many of y'all seen This Old House? You know, oh, good. Worried there for a minute. But This Old House was an idea of what? Where they take these contractors, these specialists that have really kind of unique skill sets of rehabbing these old houses. They start with an old house, and when they're done, they've got something that really doesn't look anything like it did before. And thank goodness for sponsors. They spent a lot more money than any of the rest of us ever could, but it's really beautiful, really different. You might be able to tell where the old house was and all the new stuff is. So that was kind of the idea of This Old House. And so that's a great analogy for evolution, because it spends all the time talking about changes, things that were done to this old house, but it doesn't tell you who built it, right? So that's how evolution fits in religion, or how it can and should fit. It doesn't attempt to answer how things happen. It tends to answer how things change over time. So then another question that came up, so this idea of that, and this is a great one. How old is the earth? Oh, that's a good one. Well, we can look at it a couple of different ways. So if we look at the biblical model, Even though you have to keep in mind the Bible was not written in English, especially King James English, right? And so people can argue all day long interpretation of Doi and things of that nature, and I'm not going to get into that. That's a waste of time. But I can talk about in the context of 6,000 or 10,000 years old. 6 days, 24 hours a day is one interpretation. And then I can also look at the scientific interpretation. And oftentimes, we've heard the billions of years model, and boy, right off the bat, that throws up a red flag. I don't care how you've stacked that up, 6,000 years versus billions of years, there's no way to reconcile those two things. Well, I'm going to think about it a little bit differently. So if we look at the scientific model for the way this all kind of began, there's this idea of, the universe started, the latest numbers are 14 point something billion years ago. That puts the earth at about 4.58, something like that. So 4.6 billion years, whatever the numbers are, throw the numbers out there, doesn't matter. But here's the thing. If we look at the scientific understanding of the way it all began, what did we start with? And the answer is nothing. And then in a moment's time, what's referred to in science as a Planck's constant, named after Planck, in a moment's time from nothing became all of this something that started expanding. That sounds vaguely familiar, regardless of the timing on it. So now we've had all of this something expand out of nothing, and it starts expanding really quickly. And then after a certain amount of time, a relatively short period of time of that expansion, because that Planck's constant is like a really short, just millisecond time span, it just all kind of exploded. And then in a relatively short period of time, certain parts of that started to cool down and coalesce and started to form like balls of rock. And then other parts kind of started to coalesce these gases around it, and they started to slow down. And we had the beginnings of what looked like planets, no light emitting from those. And then on the other hand, we had these other gases that started kind of combining together in fission and fusion reactions. Nuclear reactions that we can't even imagine the magnitude of, and they started burning balls of gas. We call those stars, or one in particular, our sun. And so lo and behold, in a relatively short period of time, looking from science, we had darkness and light. And we had void forms. Doesn't really sound a whole lot different in a lot of ways. And so then this kind of how old is the earth thing. So we come up with this model that says, well, the earth is 4 point whatever billion years old. Well, how do we estimate that? And that's kind of an interesting story. Really, it goes back to how we estimate the whole thing with the age of the universe. One of the ways we do that is an understanding of what's called the Doppler effect. So you've probably heard of the Doppler effect in like radar, Doppler radar, things of that nature. And the Doppler effect is like this really cool thing. If you ever got stuck at the railroad crossing, so you're stuck at the railroad crossing waiting, and you see a train coming, and if it's one of those really fast trains that just flies right through, you may notice something about the train whistle. Starts off, it's real high pitched, and as it goes by you and as it goes away, the pitch lowers. So it goes from a high pitch to a low pitch. That's the Doppler effect. Because basically what's happening is those sound waves, as they're coming towards you, they're being compressed into really short sections, so it's a real high sound. And as it goes back and past you, it starts pulling and stretching them out, so now it gets to be a low frequency sound. The idea is kind of like this. You get a friend and you get a slinky. All right, hopefully everybody knows what a slinky is, right? That little springy thing. Okay. And here's what you do. You get your friend and you get them off to one side and you say, take that slinky and walk as far as you can. Stretch that thing out. And now when you tell them to start running past you. So as they run to you, that slinky gets shorter, and as they run past you, it gets longer. And if they run long enough, just let go of it and run. It's funny, but no, that's not. Oh, no, that was really wrong. But anyway, that's the Doppler effect. And so we can do the same thing with light. Light is waveform energy. So light that's coming towards us really quickly will have a blue look to it because it's a higher frequency than if it goes past us and it has a red look. So if you've ever read anything where they talk about the blue to red shift in light, that's what they're talking about. And so a way we kind of measure that age of the universe is we look at that light. When we see that red shift, we can measure that red shift. We can measure the blue shift coming towards us, and that tells us two things. One, it kind of tells us our place from the epicenter of the beginning of the universe. And then the second thing it tells us is how fast the universe is expanding, so we can get some idea from that how old it is. Again, based on our understanding. That's the part you can't lose sight of. So with what we know, 3 dimensions and a little bit of time, that's what we start to understand. But to put it in a nutshell, here's the way I really look at this. So that's some of the science behind how we come up with these billion-year models. A lot of the events fall very well into place to the biblical account of the way this all started. And so here's really the way I look at it in a nutshell. The God I serve, if the way he put this into place was 14-something billion years ago, things blew up and we're watching it do what it's doing now, okay. Because one thing the Big Bang Theory never tells us is, well, who lit the fuse, right? The God I serve, if he wanted to do everything in 6 literal 24-hour days, 6,000 years ago, yep, he could do that. The God I serve, if he wanted to do everything you see around us 6 days ago in 0.6 of a second with all of the history, all the memories, everything that we think we know today, yeah, he could do that. Don't put God in a box of our understanding. That becomes irrelevant. So how old is the earth? It's a wonderful question. Scientific understanding gives us one idea, but there's also continuity in that idea with the way we see it laid out in the Bible. So another question that often comes up, global warming. Oh, gotta love that one. All right, I want to start off by saying this. Al Gore is and never was a scientist. Al Gore did not create the internet. Al Gore's transcripts were worse than, well, never mind, I'm not going to do that. But anyway, global warming. Well, you notice now we don't call it global warming anymore, right? Now it's a global climate change is what we like to call it. And why is that? Why do we change it to global climate change? Well, there's a simple reason. It started getting colder. Now, before I put this slide up, how many of y'all had heard of global warming? Yeah, everybody's heard of that, right? All right. Yeah. How many of y'all have heard of the hypsothermal? Yeah, man, we get 1 or 2 people like, well, yeah, I think I read that in a meme somewhere, right? Well, here's the deal. Something we do know about our planet was in the past, there was a point in time looking at pollen records through ice cores and things of that nature. There was a time in our past history of this planet where it was substantially, consistently warmer than it is now. And so then the question starts to change a little bit. The question is really this. When we look at global climate change, is the climate changing? Yeah, it is. Well, just like science is tentative, everything on this planet is kind of tentative as well. So then the question really starts to be, how much of global warming is a natural cycle of the planet, and how much of it are we causing, the so-called anthropological effects? How much of it are we doing? And the simple answer for that is we don't know. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We know things that contribute to this problem. You've heard about carbon dioxide emissions, use burning fossil fuels. We blame cars when industry does more than all the cars on this planet could ever do, but that's another story. So we know carbon dioxide is one thing. There's also another greenhouse gas that's much worse than carbon dioxide. It's called methane. And oddly enough, the methane that we see on this planet today, the increasing emissions of methanes, we probably are doing something with that. It's called cow farts. Changing the diet of herbivores, cattle in particular, and concentrating them in feedlots has increased the amount of methane production from those cattle to the point that, yes, we are pumping a lot of methane indirectly into the atmosphere. But then the real question is, how much effect are we actually having? And at this point, that's not a question we can really answer. And part of the reason for that isn't because of the tools of science. We have some pretty good tools. One of the biggest problems is we made the mistake of involving politics in science. So then it becomes a political thing, or it becomes a social thing. And so we lose some of the good science and what's actually happening in climate change because of other efforts and lobbyists. Y'all may have heard some years ago we were all going to die because of the hole in the ozone layer. Some of you probably remember that. To the point that we banned a certain group of chemicals called CFCs, the chlorinated fluorocarbons, freons, and stuff that used to be propellant in hairsprays that wouldn't burn. Now we put butane in them, so it's really good for potato guns and stuff. But anyway, that's a physics lesson. But we banned all of this stuff in this effort to change this, to do away with this hole in the ozone and all these wonderful things. Well, the impetus or the start of that was the fact that a major company had actually let the patent lapse on R12 Freon, and they were about to lose millions of dollars on it. And so they lobbied a lot of that change to take place so they could come out with the next version of Freon and sell it. That's the part of the story they don't tell you. That's one case, I guess, where it did work, though. The political lobbyists did actually do something to make a change, but it's not for the reason you might think. So the long and short on global climate change is the climate changing? Yes. Are we doing something to facilitate that? Yes. What are we doing and how much? We still don't know. So I guess we'll see where it goes from there. Last couple of thoughts I have, just kind of wrapping things up. So this is one of my favorite ones. The more I started kind of digging into this, and this isn't a specific question, but this kind of helps us put things in perspective, is the more that we understand, the more we science, as I kind of jokingly put up here, the more likely we are to not exist. Y'all have probably heard this before, that, if you take a bumblebee and you look at the aerodynamics of a bumblebee, write that out, work the equations out. On paper, a bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly, right? So that's another one of those things. Good thing critters don't read what we write. Because a bumblebee go, oh man, I guess it won't fly anymore. Well, they can. A few other things about us to help put this in perspective. And this is the part where I just can't understand why scientists get blinded sometimes, to think that kind of the this is it model, if you will. Just take our planet. So y'all have probably heard this some years ago. As we developed better technology to kind of reach out into far galaxies, we started to look for these planets that were more like Earth. And this idea that we could find solar systems that had a sun similar to the size of ours, and then within this habitable region, around 90 million miles or so away from that sun, if you had a planet orbiting that it could have Earth-like tendencies, so to speak. Well, that sounds wonderful, except they leave out Big Brother. Our solar system has a big brother that protects us by the name of Jupiter. So if you think back to your solar system, and Jupiter's like the big ball of gas. So I think that's kind of funny. It's a big ball of gas protecting us, but anyway. And here's how that works. Where we're at, yes, we're in a habitable zone because of the light incoming and the temperatures and all that other stuff. But if it wasn't for Jupiter capturing most of the asteroids and other things flying through space, then we probably would have been annihilated a long time ago. Our solar system, the way it's put in place, is unique in that it protects the Earth from a lot of other things flying through this universe, for that matter. So that kind of makes our existence somewhat unlikely. When we look at the intricacies of a cell, even the simplest cell, and how this works, there was a project some time ago called Synthetic Genomics that was started, where a company and a person in particular set out, they were going to create artificial life. And the thing that's kind of funny about it, the way they were going to do it was we now have the ability to synthesize DNA. We can literally punch in the A's, T's, and G's in whatever order we want them and synthesize a string of DNA that functions just like DNA in nature. So the idea was that this guy was going to create synthetic life by taking a living organism and removing genes out of it until he found the minimum number of genes it took for that thing to live and reproduce. So really pare down and clean up the genome, so to speak. Just the genes that this thing needed to live and reproduce. And then he was going to create a membrane, basically looking at the phospholipid membrane of a cell. And so he's going to produce this artificial life. Well, two things about that. One, it hasn't happened yet. And two, how's that artificial? He's taking all the stuff that we already know about things that exist and just making copies of it. But here's the thing. When we think about a living, functioning cell, two analogies that I can think of that kind of sum this up. And so I moved from the south, Tornado Alley, to the Midwest, the other Tornado Alley. Don't know why I did that. Here's an analogy for you. In the way life exists today, if it just came about from nothing directing it in any way, shape, or form. And I had a airplane junkyard. So a bunch of airplane parts scattered around everywhere, and I don't. That's one of the few things I don't have, but all of that stuff laying out there. And a tornado comes through, and as the tornado passes, on the back side of that, in the path of that tornado, is an airplane gassed, functioning, ready to take off. That would be an analogy of life just happening the way we see it today without some kind of something out there driving that. Another analogy that's been used is a watchmaker, not the digital watches, the old school one that had all the gears and springs and all that fun stuff in it. It was a watchmaker was working at his bench, and he turned around and he knocked a box of parts off. And they hit the ground, and he reached down and he picked up a watch that functioned from those parts that fell on the ground. I didn't say keep perfect time, but function, right? So the more we understand, even within our capacity to understand science and the world around us, the more unlikely us being here is, unless something else is involved in directing what's going on. Now, this isn't a bid for intelligent design. That's putting God in a box, too. So kind of the last thing, why put God in a box? So you've seen this before. So I have had to have one prop. So here's my box. Just think about yourself, your life in a box, right? So you have so much time that you're going to exist, at least in this plane. And this is your life. It's in a box. Y'all have heard of Schrodinger's cat, right? You know, if there was a cat in here, it would be dead or alive. If you leave it in there long enough, we know what the answer would be. Anyway, this is your life, right? You've got so much time there. What do you know about what's going to happen in your life? It kind of is a black box of sorts. You don't know what's going to happen day to day. And then you hear this thing about, let's put God in our lives. Put God in this box, right? That's our life. Well, here's what I'm going to do, just kind of to wrap things up. I want to challenge you, kind of back to that first thing. Scientists putting God in a box, us putting God in a box. Let God out of the box and let God be God. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimbo. Before I just take a couple comments to wrap up. So if that talk, obviously it answers maybe some questions, maybe it stirred up other questions. So please let us know the questions that stirred up so we can get those questions answered as well. Remember, our faith is an intelligent faith. We're not afraid of questions. We want to answer questions. I thought he was going to talk about how I wanted to wrap up. Many times what happens in the natural and the supernatural kind of mimic each other. When you're a small child, or if you're a parent, you know how this happens. When your children are small, the parent is like, a superhero. They can fix everything, right? Just take it to dad. He'll know, right? And then there's an age when the parents are idiots. They don't know anything. And then as you get older, there's a place where, my parents were a lot smarter than I thought they were sometimes, right? Well, that kind of thing. And there's a place in our life spiritually, as we develop, it's much that way, where, we just love Jesus. He's the best thing ever. And there's a place where we read something in the magazine, or we hear something on the news, or some dingling teacher says something, and we think, oh, that must be true. And we start questioning God, the same way we would our parents. And there's a place in your faith, if you continue to grow in your faith, if you continue to walk, take next steps, if you continue to grow in your faith, there's a place where you start to realize that God was right, that he's beyond your imagination. Now, it's hard to understand that sometimes. As a parent, my 3-year-old, let's say, doesn't have the capability to comprehend some of the things I'm doing as a parent. They just can't get their head around it. Maybe as a 14-year-old, they can't. But as they get older, they can understand a little more. Maybe as a 14-year-old, now the 3-year-old, they just said, whoever dad thinks is great, that's what we're going to do. But as a 14-year-old, they wanted to argue with me and thought I was dumb and didn't understand why. But maybe by the time they get to whatever age, they start to realize dad was probably a little smarter than he was. So here's what I want to close with. Sometimes you back up and just kind of think about some of your questions and put things in context. And, Jimbo kept talking about how science is tentative. That's his word. How we talk about truth around here a lot is that Scripture is the one thing in this world that is what we call absolute truth. It's good for all, it's true for all people in all times and all places. It's always been. It hasn't changed. But he can give you example after example where science has changed. The facts, the momentary fact, it keeps changing. Scripture hasn't. There's nothing else that tells you that. What God said, what God did, he didn't have to keep rewriting the Bible. There's not a new edition coming out that's like, oh, now we have some new truth because something else is not like that. Same story. And we're trying to discover him. And he's way beyond us. And so as the teenagers, as he was talking about, keep growing up and trying to figure out who God is, sometimes we just need to remember God is way beyond us. His understanding is beyond us. What he does is beyond us. And so I want to ask you to do, and remind you, give you permission maybe, it's okay to allow yourself to buy in, to embrace the greatness of God, the absolute majesty of God. The Bible talks about this faith as a child. Jesus would say, unless you have the faith of a child, you will not enter in the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is God's way of doing things, right? And so just remember, okay, so if we talk about this walk in your spiritual journey, when you're early in your faith, it's easy to trust God. There's this place in your faith where it's kind of, I'll say, hard sometimes. Like I have all these questions. What about this? And what about this? And what about this? That's a hard phase. I get it. But as you keep walking, taking next steps, asking questions, getting answers, right? And recognize that sometimes the science teacher at school or the Discovery Channel that you're watching or the Time Magazine article that you read is not equal to God, right? Just keep asking questions, keep seeking truth, keep walking, taking next steps. And as you continue to grow in your faith, you'll come to a place where you're going to realize, so God really was right. He really is faithful. He really did do that. He really is consistent. He really is that powerful. He really is that majestic. He really is that great. We know at 14, our parents aren't superheroes. But whether you're spiritually 3, or you're spiritually 14, or you're spiritually 44, your God's still a superhero. He's still God. He still speaks things in existence. He's exactly who he said he was. And whether it's hope or it's love or it's peace, whether it's the questions of the Bible, or what you need him to be for you right now in this moment. What's the thing you're struggling with? Sometimes I think that our struggle with faith is just accepting that he's who he is. Just that simple statement of, God really can do that. I'm okay. Like, it's not that hard. Can he or can't he? It's not that hard. I'm using this word, I don't know what better to say. I want to give you permission to be okay with just saying, God can. He's exactly who he said he is. It's okay to call him majestic. Great. All powerful. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are a God that is beyond our imagination, a God that we're still trying to discover and we'll never comprehend. I don't want you to be comprehensible. I thank you that you make parts of you understandable, like as parents we do to our children. God, thank you. God, I pray for some of us as we hear questions being answered, as we are on this process of discovery, as new questions are arising and new answers are coming. God, I thank you that on this journey, we'll always find another reason to trust you, to fall deeper in love with you, to surrender more and obey faster. We love you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.